We're going to be talking about 30 by 30, scaling up and the art of the possible, with Minna Epps from IUCN, Emmanuel Gonçalves, Oceana Azul Foundation, Virgil Zetterland, and also remotely, I hope we have Peter Thompson, again, not able to be with us in person because of COVID, but I hope, Peter, there you are, hello, welcome. So I think you're all familiar with the aim of protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. It's frighteningly close. I mean, you know, really 5 years is nothing almost. And I believe we're only at about 3%. Is that roughly the right figure? So I think what we want to get a sense, we want to have a brutally realistic look at this very, very worthy target, both from a quantitative point of view, how likely is it, how do we begin to get close to it, and also from a qualitative perspective of, you know, what is the actual art of not just protection, but making sure that it really works. Peter, as yesterday, perhaps I turn to you first. And first of all, I hope you're feeling well. I hope the COVID is gradually retreating. So you have our gratitude for joining us in these circumstances. But give us a sense of the importance of this target and how you see the chances of actually getting there.
Thanks very much. Well, first of all, thanks for your message on the COVID, and to let you know that I tested negative today.
So hooray, hooray.
Free of COVID.
Hooray.
So, look, this is such an important topic, and I'm, you know, first of all, say hi to the panelists. Great to see you all there. But thanks to the economists for putting this one on, because I can think of a few more important matters for the ocean's well-being than this 30 by 30 target. I'll explain why. So at the Kunming Montreal conference, when the Global Biodiversity Framework was agreed to, the reason we agreed to that, this 30 by 30, protecting 30% of the planet by 2030, the reason we agreed to that was that the best of our Earth scientists told us, us being the global community, that if we didn't protect 30% of the planet by 2030, we were going to see the beginning of a massive cascading away of biodiversity on the planet, you know, which eventually leads to us going to extinction too. So this is urgent work to be done. Of course, it's a very, very high bar to get to that 30% protection, but it's for our own well-being. So that's why we've set the bar, and that's why we're all working towards it. So when we were at the CBD COP in Cali a few months ago, we took this matter head on and said, okay, where's the plan to get to the 30%? So one of the things that we did as the Friends of Ocean Action and the ocean global community was say, let's put a plan in place, an action plan to get there. So the Friends of Ocean Action, which is a World Economic Forum-based platform that I happen to co-chair, we've put in place, we've raised the funds, we've put the consultants in place, and that plan is now being prepared, and we're going to launch it at the UN Ocean Conference in Nice in 3 months' time. So that plan is going to be meant as a policy guidance for countries and everybody to work to over the next 5 or 6 years to get to that 30% or close to it. So that is the plan. Now, practicalities of putting in MPAs. Look, I've just come from the Honiara Summit, which was a summit that I organized with FAO in the Solomon Islands. And I mention this because it has huge implications for MPAs. And the implications are that, you know, we had in Honiara for a reason. This is FAO, and I chose Honiara because 60% of the world's tuna for the last half century has been sustainably managed by the authorities in the West and Central Pacific. So it's possible to sustainably manage it if you do it right. So that's why we had the summit out there. And all of the RFMOs and regional fisheries bodies from around the world, from Antarctica to the equator, came to that summit. And one of the conclusions that I got is that when we're talking about marine protected areas, first of all, we can't take it for granted that the countries which control so much of the ocean, mostly small island developing states, or many small island developing states with their huge EEZs, we can't expect them to do this on behalf of the rest of the world, especially because many of them are developing countries or even least developed countries. Secondly, we have to have the RFMOs, the regional fisheries management organizations, and the regional fisheries bodies at the table when we're talking about MPAs. We have given them, under UNCLOS, the responsibility of managing these fisheries. They have to be at the table when we're talking about carving out 30% of the ocean for protection. And I think my last point that I'd make, because you've got very high quality speakers who know more about this subject than me on your panel, is that OECMs are going to be vital here. We're not talking about full protection when we talk about 30%. So the definition of the OECMs, and there's good work being done on that by specialists to define OECMs better. But the World Conservation Congress, which MENA is building up towards in Abu Dhabi in October, will be another, after UNOC, will be another very important point of making sure that the RFMOs, that the fisheries sector is at the table when we're talking about marine protected areas.
Yes.
Thank you.
Peter, can I just probe you a little bit more about this plan that you said is sort of in the final stages, clearly, of preparation, that presumably you can't go into details, but does it give you confidence that 30% is actually going to happen? Or is it, I mean, sometimes these targets are useful as aspiration, but there's a question about how actually achievable they are. How practical is the plan?
Absolutely. Firstly, just one thing, Dan, it's not in its closing stages. We're frantically working on it now. I say that because a lot of the people present are going to be contacted by our consultants. So if you haven't been contacted yet, it's not because we're at the closing stages. We're at the opening stages of preparing this plan. So what do I expect? I expect it, as I said, to provide the guiding principles of how we're going to do this over the next 5 or 6 years. But in terms of will we get the 30%, I don't think that actually matters. What matters is the effort to get there. It's like the SDG 14. We haven't hit any of our targets under SDG 14 in time. But that doesn't mean that we haven't achieved great things by setting SDG 14 in place, giving ourselves a goal to work towards. And the effort by the world has been superb for around SDG 14. But we haven't hit our targets. So what I'm saying is if we don't get to protecting 30% by 2030, it's not going to cause me to lose sleep because we will be moving in the direction of getting 30%.
Right. Point taken. Minna, you're looking at these things as well. You had a little bit of progress today on at least one aspect of it. You want to tell us all about this?
Yeah, so thank you very much. Really lovely to be here and really lovely to see you, Peter, and also for coming back and re-energizing the room after the coffee break and inserting so much positivism. So yes, and I do want to acknowledge that even the policies in terms of ocean policy has been pretty much stagnant the last 20 years. But in the last 2.5 years, we have seen significant progress. And this coming to concluding of the target, 30 by 30, and having that's part of the target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework is, an outstanding achievement in itself. And we do need to have quantifiable targets. I think also, to Peter's point, is really about the fact that we actually were really realistic and we took a hard look and said, no, we didn't meet the ACHI targets, we haven't met the SDG 14 targets, and yet we're setting a new, even more ambitious target. And I think that this is really it's key. It's not just 30%. Where should they be? And how should? And we'll get to that in a minute. But I would want to say that we are not going to get to 30% protection if we don't have the BBNJ treaty enter into force. That is absolutely crucial. And I do want to take this opportunity to really congratulate Her Excellency, Hilda Heine, who was just here from the President of Marshall Island, and yesterday the deposit, so they have officially ratified the BBNJ treaty. So really a big congratulations for the SIDS, who are really, I would say, charging the course. So what this means is that once the BBNJ treaty enters into force, it's the third international legally binding instrument under UNCLOS, and it will actually allow us to establish marine protected areas. There will be a legal mechanism. Of course, we have to build and strengthen those institutions to decide
in
where.
the high seas, is
In the high seas, which is
so
almost half of our planet.
Just to be clear, it doesn't, in and of itself, move the needle from towards 30%, but it enables the needle to be moved further in other areas. Is that right?
Yes, because if you just take all of the EEZs of the world, of the
Yeah.
coastal states, you are going to end up with, I think it's about 32%.
Right.
So that means that we will have to protect all
The
of our
entirety of
EEZ.
it,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
and I don't think that's going to
So
happen.
this is a prerequisite to get to 30%.
I believe so.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and what's the next step along, if you ratification, and at the sort of global level, ratification of the High Seas Treaty, which hopefully can come, not long after Nice, if being optimistic. Are there other sort of macro moves that need to be made, or is it just a lot of groundwork by individual countries to get to the 30%?
Oh, the work has already started, and I think that's really, really key. We have a coalition of the willing, so to say, really spearheaded, championed by Chile. They're working on the Salas y Gomez and Nika Ridge, and basically it's really coming together to say, what are the plans, where should they be? We are working on a Living High Seas initiative to really look at what are the key areas that we actually need to protect, and you need to prepare those. So once the BBNJ treaty enters into force, which will be 120 days after the 60th ratification, then at the first COP, we need to come with ready-made proposals that can be funded, that can be enforced. So that work is very much ongoing. And I think at UNOC, we will see a revival of the High Ambition Coalition for BBNJ.
Great. I should have said at the outset that this session, by the way, is supported by Blancpain, so we're very grateful to Blancpain for its support in this, and indeed, as you've heard before, of the, for all the support that you've given to this series of events over the years. Emmanuel, if I could go to the Azores, you're an example of expanding an MPA. Tell us a little bit about your work and what this expansion means and what effect it's having.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's a big pleasure to also be here today. And I would like maybe to start saying the following. And going back to the question of the 30% and how hard it is. It's hard. It's very, very hard. And we are not going to do it either on quantity or on quality. And it's okay. We failed 2010, we failed 2020. It's not a big deal that we're going to fail 2030, but it's a big deal if we don't do it with quality. And it's a big deal if we don't replicate the good examples that are out there. And I think this is the thing that we need to realize from start on the art of the possible, if you want. And the Azores is showing that the art of the possible, one, needs to tackle the problem as it is, at size. Because small sizes, there are lots of good examples, amazing examples of small-scale MPAs that can work for communities and coastal states. But the question that we're facing are the big existential challenges. The climate emergency is out of control. 2024 was the warmest year ever. The first 6 months of the year were record after record each month. The second 6 months of the year were the second months ever warmer, so we are increasing emissions. That's one part of the equation. The second part of the equation is the biodiversity crisis is out of control as well. So, and this is the scale at which we need to put the 30% protection. And by the way, that 30% protection needs to be included into 100% managed ocean, which means that 70% is going to be sustainable managed. And this is also on the spotlight because this will drive me into the quality issue. And the big problem that we all need to face is that everyone wants to fish inside an MPA.
Because there's lots of fish.
Not just because there's lots of fish, because people don't like restrictions on fishing. They don't like restriction on activities. And so what we're trying to do is water down the quality. And this is what we're seeing in international target. And that's not what science tells us. Science tells us that 30% full protection is what you need. to have a restored ocean so that the functions of that ocean can rebuild the biomass, of course, but can also protect life. MPAs are not about fisheries. They can have a side effect, which is great, which is they'll produce much more biomass, and that will support fishing communities and fisheries. But MPA is about protecting the life of the ocean. And we are only trying to fully protect 30% of that life. And protecting that life is very important because, even if tuna is passing through an MPA, tuna is representing an asset for that region, because all that carbon, all that biomass is going to support the communities in the deep sea. There is all these connections that are disrupted when we start extracting. And so if we are looking at marine protected areas, and we are in the international targets as not as full protection, but at areas where we are trying to include all the activities inside, they are not going to work. And so going to Azores, what the Azores did is extraordinary. The Azores is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, one of the busiest areas on the planet, with submarine cables, maritime transports, fishing industry, industrial fishing. And through a structured process that was implemented through a partnership with the Oceano Azul Foundation, but also with our partners from the Waite Institute and a network of international partners, they did a hard thing, which was to do a step-by-step structured process where the first step was to have this vision of a protected ocean, and a protected ocean that then can provide for a healthy economy. And these linkages means that this 30% protection in place, among which half of it is fully protected and the other half is only pole and line fishing and small-scale fishing, allow them to have this capacity to pass the word that it's possible to have a win-win solution that we know MPAs can be if they are set in place with the standards that they need to be set in place.
And how long is your experience of this so far, sir?
So the Azores established this process within 4 to 5 years, with COVID in the middle, and it went through a number of steps, which I think it's important to talk about, because this is where, when we talk about the plan, that plan needs to have a certain number of characteristics for it to be able to work. On the onset is the partnership. So the Blue Azores program was a partnership done with an MOU, with a structured approach through these three partners, Oceano Azul Foundation, Waite Institute, and the government of Azores. Then the government of Azores is on the helm of this, which is very important, because in many processes we see other types of solutions. Then there is a common vision to protect, promote, and value nature. These three things are very important, because protect is to be able to restore the ocean. Promote is education, is having a society which is are aware and supporting the vision of this area. And valuing is bringing the economy into the equation. And these three things need to work hand in hand. Then there was the rationale. Why protect 30%? Why protect now? So you need to bring the science in. And the science aspect is critical. The science aspect is critical because one, you need to work with whatever science you have. We don't have time. So we're not going to launch a 10-year science program, which is great and you can do at the same time, but you are going to work with the science that you have. The Azores was very lucky because they had local scientists working on this area for a long time, but also we did scientific expeditions to also up this game and have the solutions in place. Then participation was key. For the offshore network of MPAs, 43 meetings were done with all stakeholders. And these all stakeholders were sitting on the table from start, defining the goals that the Azores were going to pursue, defining a structured approach on how to engage this common vision, how to work with the scientific advice, how to approve those goals within that structure, and then use a collaborative design to structure this network in a way where 2/3 of the network was proposed by the fishing industry and the fishing communities. And this is almost unheard of. And then, of course, you also need to have the most important, one of the most important ingredients of all, which is leadership by decision makers. Because this is not possible to be done. We're not going to be anywhere near 30% in 2030 if we don't have leadership by the international community and by the leaders of countries. And let me just give you one number, which is it took us 30 years to arrive to 3%.
Right.
If we don't change our methods, we're going to take 300 years, and this is what's on the table right now.
Right. Okay. Well, I want to come back to you in a bit about the results and what you actually see from all this work. But I think you've given us a fascinating case study of what it takes to do this, obviously very systematically and very well thought through. But Virgil, at Protected Seas, you've been looking not just at this one MPA, but at the whole very ambitious project of mapping them around the world and giving a sense of how they all work and giving tools, I think, to monitor what is the 3% and what one hopes will be the 30%. So your project will only grow, we hope. But tell us a little bit about this work, because it's a hugely ambitious project you've been involved in.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, and thank you to The Economist for the opportunity to be here, and thank you all for all the wonderful work you do. Again, I think this tagline is great, to try and bring us healthy seas with sustainable growth. And at Protected Seas, we're really trying to capture the complexity, which is how we manage human use on the ocean, particularly for marine protected areas and also area-based fisheries. And we're trying to capture all that at the area level, really distill it into information that's broadly usable and transparent to all the stakeholders. And we hope with that be able to power new insights and awareness, again, to accelerate this growth that's needed in marine protected areas. And as has been eloquently spoken, the overall need to sustainably manage the entire ocean, not just 30% of the ocean. Our team over the last 10 years has looked at over 25,000 individual areas, looking at the rules, regulations, again, capturing what's allowed, restricted, and prohibited in terms of fishing gear and activities. And we do really want to congratulate the Azores. We just reviewed the new expansion, and the feedback from my team is that was the best written designation they'd ever seen, because it actually already answers the questions of what will the rules likely be, what is the timeline for implementation, when can we expect new information. We're really happy here at The Economist to say we have this expansion on our map and what we call our version 2 preview. You're welcome to come by out on a coffee break and we can show it to you interactively. But yeah, again, the quality is really critical. We're at that sort of 3% highly and fully protected, using a bunch of different metrics. I just want to, say at this point again, we need to focus on doing it right for the ocean and for humanity, and not trying to meet an arbitrary number. Because if we're just trying to meet a deadline, I don't think we're going to see the outcomes that we all need to see in the ocean.
Let's delve deeper into the qualitative. Well, one more thing on the quantity, because you had brought in our discussions earlier, some very striking numbers that of the numbers of MPAs at the moment, large and small. If you scale that up to where it needs to be at 30%, the numbers are quite mind-blowing, aren't they? Do you want to give us the numbers?
Sure. So there was a recent study done, and again, right now, the 47 largest MPAs represent about 77% of all MPA area. And over half of all MPAs are under a kilometer squared in area. So there's a giant, there's a small pool of really big MPAs, and there's a already massive pool of small MPAs. And if we maintain those same ratios, to meet 30%, we would need about 300 more mega MPAs, let's call them, which seems like a reasonable number in a global community. But that would also mean we need 190,000 small MPAs. And again, realistically, even if that was the right number, and I'm not going to argue that it is, that would take a total change in how MPAs, especially these small ones, are created, governed, and established.
But even the 300, it seems to me, I mean, hearing the work that Emmanuel had to go through for a large MPA like the Azores, I mean, it's not a trivial matter.
No.
To do 300, multiply that by 300 is no trivial task, obviously. So
Yeah, and, in our timelines with the BB&J, clearly that's needed. The high seas are 2/3 of the ocean. Yeah. So again, realistically, we need significant MPAs in the high seas. And again, we're entering a new realm with the governance there of the process is laid out, but exercising the process.
Okay, well, let's go to the qualitative aspect, and back to you, Peter, for the first look at this. I mean, you've been focusing on, a plan to get to roll this out on a larger scale. But it's not just the scale, surely. It's within MPAs, how they're policed, how they function, do they work? There's a huge range of effectiveness. Whether they're in the right areas even. You want to make sure, presumably, that the MPAs are in the areas where they have the biggest impact. Is that part of is that integrated into your thinking as well, the governance of them, as well as just the scale of it all?
Well, absolutely. I think the discussion this morning has been very much around the protection side of things, without thinking about, what you're going to do with the revenue which is foregone from fisheries, from somewhere like, say, the Republic of Kiribati, which has a vast EEZ. If I talk to the president of Kiribati, he says, well, if I put my waters into marine protected areas, what do I do with all my fishing licenses? This is what pays the bills in my country. So, essential part of all this is the finance aspect of this protection exercise that we're undergoing. That is revolutionary as the idea of creating all these marine protected areas. And that's going to be a central part of the UN Ocean Conference in June, finance. Of course, based on science, as Emmanuel has said, this all has to be based on science. And we don't want MPAs in irrelevant parts of the ocean. We want them in biodiversity-rich parts of the ocean, and in climate change-smart parts of the ocean as well, because marine species are on the move. So all of the above really underlines how important it is that the UN Ocean Conference, that we're looking at finance and science as well as protection. But those are the big three for me, because protection means countering biodiversity loss. We've seen how it's been done in Azores, and it's just such a great example. And by the way, when we're talking about Azores, it's the biggest MPA in the North Atlantic. This is not peanuts. This is huge stuff that Oceano Azul and the Azoreans have pulled off. So congratulations to them. We have to go to the same scale in places like Camelot and Antarctica, where we have got scientifically approved giant MPAs on the table there, but we need a couple of countries to come on board there. So all in all, I don't think it's by any means an impossible task. We just have to push on, and we have this great opportunity in Nice in June. And I endorse what Mina said there about ratify BB&J. If all the World Ocean Summit delegates go back to their countries and ask their local MPs, what are we doing about ratifying BB&J? There's still time to do it between now and June. So that's a take-home message for everybody. But finance, science, and biodiversity loss / protection, that's what is going to be headlining things in Nice. And in fact, the opening action panel, which is on the first day of the UN Ocean Conference, is addressing exactly this subject of how best to protect the ocean.
Do you feel the wind is, to use a nautical metaphor, the wind is in the sails for all this? I always like listening to Peter because he's so positive about the...
Absolutely. He just managed to reinstate the art of possible. Yeah. And, no smooth seas. Only, what is it? The rough seas, no smooth sailor has made a skilled sailor or something. The anecdote goes. So I just want to comment on just going back to what you said about the quality. And I think, of course, we do have to make sure that, if we just focus on a large quantitative target and rushing to get there, and the fact that we need to maintain that there's a positive correlation between scaling up and the impact we're actually having and seeing. I do think that it's, to Manuel's point about the partnership, is really key, because in an ideal situation, you have alignment between the government, the local community, the scientists, etc. That takes a lot of effort and trust to get there. And in terms of the quality, more than 60 countries are engaged and have signed up to IUCN's global standard, the only global standard on actually measuring positive conservation outcomes. It's inclusive governance, etc. That is the green list. So that is something that's also included in the GBF framework. So this is something that you can actually measure and hold accountable. It's supposed to be rewarding and incentivizing, just as we have eco-labels or other economic instruments, etc. And it's also, again, in the context of the green list, we are really looking at what are the financing mechanisms. So that kind of leverage into first equality, and also to your point in terms of what and where are we actually protecting. We have EPSAs, so the ecological and biological significant areas, but again, they also go into a kind of a political process. So what we also need to define is what are the key biodiversity areas and the scientific thresholds. And if there is actually an online tool, which is a big partnership on the key biodiversity areas and the standard, you can actually go on it's called the IBAT tool, so Integrated Biodiversity Assessment Tool, where you can then see and pull out different maps. And there is still quite a large disconnect between where the MPAs are and where the biological rich areas are. But also bearing in mind, it's not just about, we have to again really think about what is the objective. Is it biodiversity halting or reversing, declining biodiversity loss? But we also need to focus on the important stuff of the ocean, which is the productivity. So we are always advocating for a network of marine protected area, large or small. We need both in order to get there. And then on the financing mechanism, I think again, once the BBNJ treaty enters into force, not only will we have a legal mechanism to establish marine protected areas in the high seas, it also opens up possibilities of different revenue sources, whether it's user fees, access fees, or royalties, and not only banking on that, because I think, to Peter's point, is like if we can get the financing mechanism right, that will finance the 30 by 30. And we have a lot of different approaches that have proven successful.
Who convene? I mean, you say you have the mechanism to set up MPAs in the high seas, but who initiates that or catalyzes that? Because you don't have a state that is going to be, this is my territory. By definition, it's beyond national territories. Is it organization? Is it the UN? Is it NGOs? Or who convenes this process?
Yeah. So the BBNJ, when it enters into force, is the internationally legally binding instrument under UNCLOS. So just like any of these other environmental conventions, you will have the Conference of Parties. So the Conference of Parties, so a state or a group of states can actually put forward these proposals. So it's really, really essential that countries ratify. They want to be among the first of the 60 before it enters into force, so they can actually when they come to the first Conference of Parties, when these crucial decisions are taken, that's, they're part of these discussions. Yeah. And then there will be there are existing, but also new institutional mechanisms will be needed to be set up. So there will be a scientific and technical body. For example, we as IUCN, we are working on the Living High Seas initiative to create this technical assistance. And also there will be a lot of the whole process for pre-consultation before you get to put forward the proposal. But civil society has played a significant role, but they are not the ones that can actually put forward an MPA. It will be, the states and the parties, exactly.
So, Emmanuel, you've heard a lot of praise for which I'm sure is very nice. But I want to hear what the results have been so far. I mean, the process seems to have been impeccable. Do you see results? I was going to say on the ground, but I really mean in the seas.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. So one, we do know that full protection works. We know that when you protect the ocean, it rebounds. And this is where you see the effects on species, on biomass, etc. Implementing a process such as this of marine protected areas has two main stages. The first stage is what we call lines on maps. And this is what was approved right now, right? So we have the parliament approving a law. The law has a number of areas set aside, have a number of rules, a number of processes to arrive to impact. But the impact doesn't come with lines on maps. And this is very important to realize. And this is why 30% protection in 2030 means protect the ocean now. because that's the only way that you'll have the effects in 2030 coming from the.
So how long is that process from drawing the lines to actually seeing results?
With lessons learned, that depends a lot, right? On the areas, on the species, on the geographies where you are. But 3 to 5 years is the standards that you can expect your return.
So if you don't see anything, if you don't see anything in 3 to 5 years, something's going wrong.
Exactly,
So, yeah.
and that's also what happens in many MPAs, that you don't have results. And why don't you have results? Because you don't have standards, because protection is not enough. You're allowing lots of impacts inside. You're not effectively implemented. And so the Blue Azores now is starting to the implementation stage. We just signed a new MOU with the government for 5 more years, 10 million euros on the table from philanthropy, also to just to implement this network of MPAs to make sure that they are successful, to do the coastal processes around each islands where you're not talking there about percentage area, you're talking about impact in communities, because that's where the main businesses are, the main fishing communities exist. And so also having this process structure in an offshore area, which is where you're going to arrive mostly to the 30%, and a nearshore area where you're going to extract most of the value. It's a structured way to achieve impact.
Yes.
Again, Daniel, just this point, we can do this, right? We know how to do this.
Yeah.
We are not going to do this by choice.
Yeah.
And this is very important for us to realize.
So, Virgil, and very briefly, because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions if we can. Our time is short, but this is where you're sort of holding feet to the fire, I guess, because you're enabling a bit of monitoring, MPA by MPA. How user-friendly is that process? How readily visible is it?
Yeah, so we have a publicly available interactive map at navigatormap.org. We always look for feedback. We're always trying to keep that as up-to-date as possible. We'll be announcing more new countries. They've just had a refresh in the reviews through the course of this year, particularly at the upcoming conferences. And yeah, we really at Protected Seas see ourselves as a sort of a third-party partner, just trying to keep transparency among all of the stakeholders of what's really being implemented, and like I said, stepping beyond just the lines on the map.
I mean, I think it has to be said that an enormous amount of work goes into getting that data ready and in a way that is usable by everybody. Are there questions for the? Yes, Peter. Sorry, you have a comment there.
Yeah, if I may, Dan, just very quickly answer your earlier question you put to Mina about who's going to lead this on new forms of finance. The UNCDF, which comes under UNDP, is presenting a proposal for one ocean finance facility when we get to the UN Ocean Conference. You imagine a finance facility where, for example, every internet that gets sent basically goes through undersea cables. Those undersea cables do damage to the ocean, or at least user pays. So if you clip the ticket, a tiny clip, you quickly end up with a multi-billion-dollar fund for all those emails that are passing across the ocean floor. Example. So that's the sort of thing we'll be discussing in Nice.
Thank you. Was a question? Was there a question? Yeah, question here.
Dominic Ziegler from The Economist. Mina, you mentioned the importance of networking MPAs, and I was just curious to know how much that is now starting to be embedded into thinking in terms of MPA planning. And also, secondly, I just would love to ask you about choice of areas for protection. For understandable reasons, till now, it's mainly been to choose biologically rich areas. How strong is the case for protecting areas that have already been trashed but that have potential for recovery?
So thank you very much, and I think that's an essential question. I mean, we were brought here today to provide some advice, but who listens to good advice? But more importantly, I think the question is who holds that definition of power in terms of what we're going to protect. So if you take the BB&J Treaty, for example, it does set out a lot of consideration. These also now needs to be interpreted. And I think there is a very strong need to take this opportunity and rethink how we do this, how do we designate MPAs and actually ultimately ensure that they deliver. And I think that, yes, I mentioned the green list, but all of these conservation tools and measurements that we have, even when we talk about an MPA, marine protected area, what is that area? It's a surface area, usually, of hectare, but we have to think about it in its entirety, the whole water column in a more three-dimensional space. So I think your question is really crucial in terms of like how can we do that? And I'm sure that Emmanuel will be happy to fill in terms of the scientific arguments for having a network of connected MPAs. I mentioned, for example, one of the key areas. So what we are trying to do is, because there's a lot of organizations, governments, I mentioned Coalition of Willing, that's going forward saying, here's the top 5 MPAs and here's the top 10, but who really decides on that? So I think what IUCN tries to do is provide that impartial evidence, but also we're a union comprised of state agency, civil society. So we've highlighted kind of 5 areas that are different, and one of them is the Salas y Gomez and Nazca Ridge, which has basically extended the seamount to over 2,900 kilometers. Because looking at it that way, you can have, there's not MPAs and marine environments are not created equal, right? So it's very different how you would manage a seamount, which attracts maybe a lot of fishing activities to different areas. So if you can have those almost kind of pilots, and I think we now need to come up with, I'm not going to say they're advocating for a blue list, but we need collectively to what is best practice of doing large-scale MPAs, a seascape approach, taking into account these excellent examples that are out there, because we are a bit short sometimes of the power of good example is very strong, and we need more of those. So I hope that kind of answered your questions. I don't know if
yes,
we would fill in terms of the traction.
Quite briefly,
network.
because we're actually out of time, which is my bad management. I should have had left more time.
Very briefly on the science aspect. So follow the science. I think it's my main message here, right? So in Azores, there were the scientific community with the stakeholders. They defined 17 criteria. The 17 criteria was things like protect all hydrothermal vents, protect 30% of the seamounts fully protected, have this habitat, that species, etc., included in the network. And so when you do the systematic conservation planning based on these criteria, then the different ways that you can put lines on maps need to match with the criteria that you have followed by the scientists.
Well, I think
so again, we know how to do this. It's not rocket science, but it's only going to work if we do this, because it's very interesting when we bring stakeholders on the table. The first thing they do is put the MPAs where they are not, right? They are going to push them aside from the areas of interest. But then you bring the criteria that they have all agreed upon, and you say, hey guys, it's not going to work because you're putting these MPAs not on the areas that
you're giving a very good case study example of the need for this network of MPAs that Mina was talking about, because you need to obviously give the experience and not make mistakes that don't need to be made, I think, from when they can be avoided. Listen, this is the sort of conversation that could easily go on, and I'm sure will go on, spill over into the breaks, but thank you very much indeed for giving us at least realism and optimism about 30 by 30. Thank you.